Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a really fascinating Fox News segment that tackles a massive question. How exactly is the IRGC's influence on global security casting a shadow all the way into our local U.S. politics? It's a pretty wild collision of high-stakes international threats hitting head-on with local city governance. We're going to objectively unpack the arguments, map out the strategic viewpoints, and see exactly how these massive foreign policy debates are landing right in our own backyards. To make sense of all this, we'll be using a global-to-local funnel for our agenda. First up, threats against U.S. officials, then assessing the IRGC. Next, we'll look at the peace-through-strength strategy, and finally, we'll examine the domestic political fallout.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, Threats Against U.S. Officials. This is really the immediate catalyst for this entire debate.
So, according to the segment, the recent intelligence about assassination plots against Donald Trump? Yeah, that isn't happening in a vacuum. The broadcast anchors these modern threats specifically to the 2020 U.S. strike on Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani, but actually traces the roots of these strained relations all the way back 47 years to 1979. The argument here is that these aren't just one-off acts of retaliation. They're part of the IRGC's calculated strategy to shake up global security by targeting top-level foreign leadership.
Bringing this right up to the present day, Representative Claudia Tenney, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, argues that this behavior has hit a totally new, alarming level of intensity. The broadcast points to some pretty specific claims like "Kill Trump" signs in Tehran and threats expanding to include former officials like Mike Pompeo. But here's the kicker. Tenney emphasizes that Iranian leadership, especially the IRGC, has completely failed to condemn any of this. And according to the source, that silence isn't just standard political posturing. It's a massive global security red flag signaling tacit support for violence.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, Assessing the IRGC. Let's look at exactly how the source views this adversary and its ultimate goals.
The entire argument really hinges on this idea, echoed by Mike Huckabee in this segment, that Iran's behavior is basically static. Think about that for a second. The assertion is that despite decades passing, different administrations coming and going, and massive shifts in global politics, the regime's core actions and rhetoric simply haven't wavered in nearly half a century.
Building on that idea of static behavior, Representative Tenney asserts that the regime's mentality is literally unchangeable. She argues they are driven by a deeply entrenched ideological mission, which remains entirely focused on targeting the U.S. and Israel. The big takeaway from the segment is the argument that policymakers aren't just dealing with a standard geopolitical rival here. They're facing an entrenched ideology, meaning the IRGC's ongoing threat to global security is permanently locked into a hostile posture.
And that brings us to the core policy debate. On one side, you have negotiations. Tenney explicitly shoots this down, arguing that going back to the diplomatic table literally just buys Iran time to stockpile resources and buddy up with other global adversaries. On the other side, deterrence. Tenney points out that historically, Iran only considers negotiating when their capabilities, like their naval power, have been physically decimated by U.S. strikes, effectively wiping out their ability to retaliate.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the peace-through-strength strategy. So if diplomatic negotiations are effectively off the table, what's the alternative game plan?
Well, the segment heavily pushes a methodology called peace through strength. Now, in the context of this broadcast, this isn't just some catchy slogan about having a big military. It's an active, aggressive strategy relying on heavy military deterrence and potential strikes to severely cripple a regime's operational capacity, with the ultimate goal of forcing a change in behavior.
And Representative Tenney definitely doesn't mince words about how this should be applied to the IRGC. She takes a totally maximalist stance, stating flat out that the organization needs to be completely obliterated. Why is that so crucial to the argument? Because it represents a fundamental shift in how the U.S. would handle global security threats. We're talking about moving entirely away from a policy of containment and management straight into active dismantling.
So how exactly does military action translate into long-term political change? The source maps out a four-step playbook. Step 1, walk away from stalling diplomatic negotiations. Step 2, apply intense military pressure and structural damage. But steps 3 and 4 are the real end game. The explicit hope Tenney argues for is that crippling the IRGC will shatter the oppressive forces holding citizens back, opening a vital window for the Iranian people and the diaspora to rise up and trigger internal regime change themselves.
All right, Section 4, Domestic Political Fallout. This is where this huge international security debate takes a really sharp, unexpected turn right into the local politics of New York City.
The broadcast zeroes in on a local controversy involving NYC Mayor Zohrab Mamdani. It highlights that his international affairs coordinator allegedly tried to set up a meeting with an Iranian government official. Now you have to connect the dots on how the segment frames this, because they've just spent time establishing the IRGC as this massive, unchangeable global threat. A local, city-level meeting attempt instantly becomes an explosive political flashpoint.
Mayor Mamdani's defense is pretty definitive. He states the meeting was canceled and that he had absolutely zero prior knowledge of it before the press started digging. But he does defend having an international affairs office in the first place, arguing that for a city of the world like New York, meeting with global leaders is just standard practice for managing city relationships.
It's a fascinating clash of perspectives, really. On one side, the mayor says this is just standard operating procedure for a major global hub. But on the other side, Representative Tenney sees it completely differently. She accuses his administration of unlawfully freelancing in federal foreign policy. Her argument is that a local mayor simply has no business conducting diplomacy with a regime the U.S. is fundamentally at odds with. And she adds that if the mayor truly didn't know about the meeting, well, that just shows poor leadership. But the segment doesn't just leave it as a bureaucratic spat over city protocol. It scales up into a much more severe ideological accusation. Tenney introduces this concept she calls the Red-Green Alliance. According to her definition in the broadcast, this is a theoretical alignment that merges extreme Islamic states with domestic communist or Marxist ideologies to create a unified subversive movement operating right here inside the United States.
She then takes this Red-Green Alliance theory and applies it directly to Mayor Mamdani and the broader domestic progressive movement. Tenney explicitly rejects the term progressive, labeling them subversive instead. She accuses this movement of actively trying to dismantle the U.S. Constitution and swap American values for foreign ideologies. The core argument she's making is that the IRGC's global influence isn't just an over-there problem anymore. She claims it's actively seeping into domestic U.S. governance through these local political links.
And that brings us to the end of our analysis. We've traced this argument all the way from international assassination plots through military deterrence against the IRGC, straight into accusations of ideological subversion in a local mayor's office. As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a really critical question to chew on. In such a hyper-connected world, how will ongoing global security tensions with entities like the IRGC continue to be weaponized in our own local domestic political arenas? It's a complex question and one that absolutely isn't going away anytime soon. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the flow of information.